Welcome to Healing Wisdom, a Thursday morning talk show featuring guests sharing their stories and knowledge. We discuss the healing aspects of the arts, metaphysics, social justice, and adventure through all types of terrain. So join me, Pandora Peoples, here on WOMR 92.1 FM in Provincetown and WFMR 91.3 FM in Orleans. We're streaming worldwide at WOMR.org. Our theme music is provided by Mason. You can find her website at masonmusic.com. That's MAESYN.
Ztraceni, wiecznie spaseni. Za nocí nejtmavších na slunce pamatuj, pamatuj. Kam jsme to kam zašli, kam jsme to zašli. Kde je, kde pohled tvůj, kde pohled tvůj.
I am super happy to be here. With my guest, Lenka Lichtenberg. She is a composer, producer, Canadian musician. She's award-winning. She's released 7 albums to date. Lenka is a Canadian folk music and international independent music award winner. She sings in multiple languages. She combines folk, jazz, and world music. And her latest album, Thieves of Dreams, is based on poetry that her grandmother wrote while she was in a concentration camp during World War II. Welcome, Lenka. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. The pleasure is all mine.
I love your music. It's so beautiful. In your latest album, Thieves of Dreams, you reclaim your grandmother's poetry. I would love for you to talk about this experience of finding your grandmother's work. What did you know about your grandmother before you found her poetry?
I knew her from the point of view of a kid who thought that she has a very fun-loving, light-hearted grandmother who doesn't knit, but other than that, she is, bakes goodies and does all these fun things with me. And that's kind of all I knew. I never got to know her from any other side, which is making me very sad because, of course, I cannot go back and ask her all the million questions that I would have now that I have discovered and fallen in love with her poetry, which is a completely different persona than the one that I remember from my childhood.
So tell us about your discovery finding her poetry.
Yes, I guess that was quite momentous for me. First of all, the occasion was not a happy one. My mother passed away, so that was in 2016. And I was looking for some documents in her desk in Prague, in her apartment. So I was going through papers and I found these little booklets that I didn't know what they were, but they looked interesting, worn. And so I started reading it. And then I quickly realized this is my grandmother's handwriting because she had a very meticulous, very particular handwriting that I really liked. And I could actually read it as opposed to my mother's who I couldn't read. So I knew for a fact this is my grandmother. And also one of the booklets was labeled by my mom and it said, poems my mother, AHF, wrote in Theresienstadt. And then the dates were 1941 or 42, now I can remember, but 1941 till 1945. So that means that it's some of the poems are from before they actually went to the concentration camp, which was in 1942. So I found it labeled like this, so I knew what it was, and I then started reading, and I literally had to sit down because I was floored. I was so taken by some of these poems because they are really very profound in many ways. There's some lighthearted ones still, which kind of go more with the image that I had of my grandmother, cute little things, but there's very few of those. Then there is love poems, and those are sometimes borderline erotic. And then there are those that are sort of very philosophical and sort of contemplating life and death. And I suppose in a not direct way, talking about the experience of the concentration camp. So there's a fair bit of darkness in there. However, even in those which were clearly written where they were written, yet even in those, there is often some hopeful thoughts as well. And that was really interesting to me. How could that even happen? And what was another surprise was the fact that many of them are about relationship. And as I once started digging and understanding more and more and more and reread my mother's memoir, I understood that those poems are the ones that were written in the concentration camp that are love poems about relationship. They are about actually the disintegration of the marriage, of the relationship that my grandmother had with her husband, my grandfather, whom I never met because from Terezín, he went to Auschwitz, and that was the end of that, of him, should I say. Yeah, he was murdered there.
Ženeme čas, točíme kolem dějin, ubíhá mlhou poraněná loď. Z taklemných světel stěžuje nám cestu, sta slabých zpomalit by chtělo chod. Loď světa jede, plná umírání, kormidlo chcem, vedem o něj boj. Svět sedletý se vzpírá, pustit příčky, loď kolísá a vynechává stroj. Strach ze vzpoury nadpříč zved šibenici, všem ústa zacpat, krvavý chce dráp. Chvilku to jen, co jste nás neslyšeli, však hlas náš proto nezesláb. Loď světa nikdo zkázy neuchrání, než my a námi dobývaný řád. Nad její stožár zvednem vlajku.
So I was really particularly intrigued by the fact that someone in such a place on the brink of death, not knowing at all what, if there's any life to be had, even tomorrow, is really so concerned about the state of her marriage. But that clearly was very heavily on her mind. And so many of the poems are, in fact, digging very deep into relationship and about the status of a woman versus a man. There is a lot of interesting things, and all of it was shocking to me because I, to begin with, had no idea that my grandmother would be writing poems then or later or before ever, because she never, as far as I knew, wrote anything at all. And she was a reader. She read all the time, but I've never seen her creative. And so that to me was a huge surprise.
Chtěla jsem tě proklít hořká zemi, protože jsi tak divně zacházela s mou vírou a nadějemi, protože zlhala, že lhala si celá. Chtěla jsem tě proklít, známá strání.
Your music really blends her poetry with these beautiful melodies. You know, when you talk about her, I can't help but think that you've inherited artistic talent from your grandmother, that it's in your DNA, that there's a real soul connection there. Do you have any idea why your mother didn't talk about these poems?
Their relationship was very complicated. My mother was a writer, not a poet. She wrote several books and was a journalist, trained as a journalist. So I think the fact that she basically refused, clearly, because these things were hidden in her desk. So she knew about it very well for years, that she knew this was there and was not motivated to put this out and give it a life of some sort. To me, it does speak to the fact that she was not really thrilled to give much of a limelight to her own mother, because they were just not in sync about just about anything. That is really sad for both of them and also for me. The problem was that when my mom was a kid, I think she adored her mother, but later on in the concentration camp, there were some issues where she was not in agreement, and she was not even in agreement with how my grandmother was trying to keep them alive. Through a connection that she had, managed to pull out their little summons pink slips from the box of the names. I don't know if it was in a box or a list or whatever it was, but there was some sort of a little note that would be who is going on the next transport the next day, which was to Auschwitz. And my grandmother, through her connection, managed to always have this contact of hers pull out their names. And so they survived in this was supposed to be like a transition ghetto where you go to be eventually sent out to Auschwitz usually, or other extermination camps. People were there usually not for that long. They would be there for a few months, maybe a year, maybe a little longer. But my grandmother and my mom, they were there for 2.5 years. And that just speaks to the fact that it was an unusual situation with this particular person always pulling out their summons. And my mother didn't like that. She wanted to go where her father went, where her friends went, who all disappeared. And she didn't like that the two of them, my mom and grandma, stayed behind. So it was a particular kind of a friction there. And there were many others. And so I don't think that really ever got fixed.
If you're just joining us now, we're speaking with Lenka Lichtenberg. Her latest album is based on her grandmother's poetry she wrote at a concentration camp during World War II. The album Thieves of Dreams is out now. And we are in the midst of our autumn pledge drive. Consider donating now to WOMR. We'd love some sustaining members on Healing Wisdom. Give us a call, 508-487-2619 or 1-800-921-WOMR.
Duše se může do nás vléci a ústa se říkat nestydí krásné a posvátné věci. Můj ráj samoty, můj ráj samoty,
And how did you sit with it in terms of creating music? Did you immediately start coming up with melodies or hearing melodies? What was your music writing process?
Well, first of all, it took me about a year to decide that I should be setting these to music. It was not an obvious thing at first because I thought those are historic documents and they should go probably to a museum. And then I abandoned that idea because I wanted the poems to live, and behind glass in a museum they would not. So I did think the next thing for me, which is most common, to to connect it to music somehow and set it. And I've also done projects before, in fact, several where I've set to music poems that I didn't write myself, somebody else's poems, mostly in Yiddish, but also other languages, French, for example. So I feel close to that type of creative process. So once I decided that that was it, that's what I was going to do, the next step was to feel intimidated. I said, oh no, what am I going to do? There's 64 poems, how am I going to find the right ones? I don't even know. And so at that point, I asked a Czech artist whom I just met like a year earlier. Her name is Millie Janatkova, and she is extremely unusual to my ear. Her music is unusual, but also like a very unique person. And I just completely fell in love with her. And I thought, okay, so she's Czech. She's going to understand the poems better than anyone, maybe better than me. And so let's see if her and I will take half and half and we'll do it together. But then COVID happened, and I realized that what we were planning to do, including like a joint presentation, we were both invited to present this in Washington and other places, and that was not going to happen. And so I thought, okay, I'll rather than sit on this for years now, I'm going to ask other composers, and I chose all women to set some of these other poems to music. So we ended up with half and half. There's 16 tracks on the album, and 8 of those are written by me, and 8 are written by other women composers, including Millie, who set 3 of them to music. Yeah.
What's your artistic mission?
I think most of my creative output is connected to identity and celebrating and first finding and then celebrating identity and your roots. And a lot of that has to do with history. So when I first started as a musician, I was like a little butterfly, just all over the place, genre-wise. I was classically trained, and I was also in a musical theater as a child. So that's 2 completely different things to start with. And then I loved folk music because my mother did, and she kind of brought that to me. I love folk music, and Czech folk music. Czech folk music is very, very beautiful. So that was that. And then pop, and then this and that. And so I just kind of like did the whole spectrum. And then actually I also did rock music for a couple of years, which was really terrible because I was a terrible rock singer. Let's just say that straight. My voice is way too gentle for that. It just doesn't work. So the built out, this kind of grungy thing, it doesn't work for me. But I tried my best. Anyways, so I did all those different genres. And I think I didn't know which was the right one until I was almost 30, and I connected. This was around the time when my mom wrote her book. She wrote a book where many of the things that happened to them during the Holocaust, I read about them for the first time in her book. I mean, she never told me much of anything. And so now I was reading this and everything started falling into place. And I sort of connected with these roots and my Jewish identity. And so I decided I was going to be a Yiddish singer. And so that was one identity. Then Czech identity, well, I guess you should have been the first one, but it wasn't. That actually is coming now as the last one. It's funny enough. And in between, folk music and living in Toronto, you are in the midst of the most diverse city with cultures from literally all around the world. And some of the bands that I have been part of, or I founded, in fact, were very much a diverse community, So I was picking up the things that I really liked from each one. For example, once I heard tabla, I fell in love completely with tabla. So I have invariably tabla in everything that that I put out. Not on all songs. I mean, in Thieves of Dreams, there's tabla, I think, on 3 songs, but I couldn't help myself. It just has to be there. So that would be one thing, that I just have certain likings and leanings that I follow that just really deeply speak to me. And as I mentioned, tabla would be one of them. Oh, I also love the sound of oud, so that would be the Middle Eastern kind of vibe, let's call it, that I really go for and enjoy very, very much. And so for years, I was just making music that sounded like that, like so-called world music. Now you call it global roots. And then the Yiddish into this. And with this artistic mission, for me, I guess it is going really deep into one's history and identity, and connecting and pulling out the things that are buried in some way. In this case, for sure, they were very buried. I didn't even know they existed, So it is a connection to the past, and then hopefully putting something from the past for everyone to enjoy, hopefully, or learn from and be a part of as well. So if I should talk about any mission, this particular album has a mission, because I was trying to bring to life my grandmother's poetry. So that was the mission. In general, other than that, I would just say I'm always trying to do something. I love music just for music, but for me, also music is even better if it has some sort of a purpose, like with Yiddish, which was some decades ago pronounced a dying language or dead language or whatever. So for me, the mission there was to help it not die. So creating new Yiddish songs, to me, that was a mission in itself, So everything has some sort of an angle to me. In my case, that is something other than music itself. Yeah.
Well, there's a really hauntingly beautiful and transformative aspect to the Thieves of Dreams album. And one song that I've played many times is the Maminka song.
Oh,
there's something about it, and I don't know what it is.
Interesting that you should say Maminka. Maminka, that means my mother, right? Not grandmother, but Maminka is mother. And that is a melody that I actually did write for my mother. I wrote it before I started writing this project, when my mother was dying. And so I wanted something that would be her, that would be about her. So I wanted to make it both sweet, happy, and sad all in the same time. And a lot of Jewish music, in fact, has exactly this. It's there is that kind of a cliche a little bit, like laughter through tears and that kind of thing. So I think the melody has exactly that. And so probably it sounds Jewish to you in some way, even though that was not intentional, but I guess, being Jewish, I bring that in there, whether I like it or not. But it was very much about my mother and her personality. And she was that. She was that, both very serious and very sweet and sad and happy, both at the same time. And so I think that melody captures that. have been invited, this project has been invited to perform at a festival in Copenhagen in Denmark next June. And there is a few more places before that, probably one in Prague as well. And I'm looking at something in Holland, maybe Germany, that will take like the Northern Europe and Czech Republic, that we will be performing Thieves of Dreams. And as it happens, we actually have a really big performance coming up now on Thursday, which is a part of Holocaust Education Week. And we're doing a multimedia with beautiful projections, with videos, really nicely staged program that is a lot of the album Thieves of Dreams, but includes narration. So the whole story of my grandmother and her family is in that particular show. So it's quite impactful, I think, from what I've seen, how people react to that. So I'm very excited to see this on stage.
We've been speaking with Lenka Lichtenberg. We're in our fall pledge drive now, so if you've enjoyed this show, please give us a call, 508-487-2619. You've been listening to Healing Wisdom at Outermost Radio. All of our shows are podcasts at WOMR.org. Also check out healingwisdomradioshow.com and contact me at pandora@WOMR.org.
Yeah. Cool.